So are there any questions, or is it, do I give such a great description that you've got it all?
I've got a quick question for you.
Yep.
Just looking at some of your graphs, and obviously you've got a lot of knowledge, wouldn't you be more looking at like another Geelong, like trying to, if you, like a Kilmore, or is there another town that you think is going to do what a Geelong's done that would be sort of better value to invest in to start with, and then you get extended capital?
It's a good question. It's a good question. To be perfectly honest, I want a blue chip area, and the reason is when I buy the properties, I actually buy the property with a long-term view that I want to hang on to that property. Now, some people might want to flip it, okay, and you're welcome to flip it. And there are some properties which I have sold. I mean, I've bought in St Kilda and I've sold in St Kilda. So there have been times I've flipped to actually get the money out of those properties and build up the portfolio that way. But I do take a long-term view, and my thinking is that in the long term, if I was to buy in a blue chip area like a Carlton or a Camberwell or a Hawthorn, those areas have got a proven track record, and they'll keep giving me a proven result. And in the long term, I think that they're going to outperform any what could be a hot spot. I mentioned before, avoid the hot spots. The reason I think you avoid a hot spot is because it's a bit like a share tip. By the time you've heard that it's a hot spot, the reason that you've heard about it being a hot spot is because there's already been the capital growth. So the interest is already there, the prices have gone up. By the time you hop on board, you've missed out on most of that capital growth. Okay, and then that hot spot isn't so hot a few years later, the excitement's gone out of that area, and then there's a new hot spot, and that area is just passé. You can gamble and you can try to find the next hot spot and hope that you get it. I don't do that. That's just me personally, okay? I know a lot of people that like Geelong, and I like visiting Geelong. I think Geelong's a fantastic area. But I haven't bought in Geelong, and I'm not that familiar with Geelong, and that's why I don't invest there, okay? Nothing wrong with Geelong, nothing wrong with Sydney, nothing wrong with Queensland. There's plenty of areas I don't invest in, simply because I don't have the knowledge. If I grew up there, if I lived there, I'd use that knowledge. But I've been an estate agent in Melbourne. I know Melbourne very, very well. I feel comfortable with Melbourne. I know how to get my comparable sales evidence. So I use that knowledge base which I have, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel in an area which I'm not that familiar with. Same could be said for commercial properties. Commercial properties, fantastic. If you buy the right commercial property, they're a really, really good investment. But I haven't personally invested in that type of property. So that's the only reason I don't discuss it. I just don't have that first-hand knowledge. I only do what I do, which I know. Good question. Any other question?
What are those properties worth in Carnegie now?
Those properties in Carnegie, to be perfectly honest, I think that they're still holding around that 550 mark.
How long ago was the purchase?
It was a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a couple of years. We bought them at a 5% discount. As I mentioned, we paid less than anyone else, and then there was that resale of 550,000. I don't think that they've done a lot since then, but I don't think that they've gone down either. In fact, there was a story that was just recently on, it was a Current Affair or 60 Minutes or one of those types of news stories, and they actually showed some apartment sales in Carnegie that looked similar to ours, and they actually sold for $550,000. Yep. Any other questions?
So how many properties have you?
13.
Yep. And they're all in Melbourne, basically?
No. I've got properties here in Shepparton, and I will continue. And as I mentioned, I really want Shepparton to prosper, and I really hope that Shepparton goes forward and Shepparton does continue to grow. But it's been such a slow burn. Like it's really slow. It's a real slow burn here. So I'll continue to buy properties in Shepparton, but they've got to tick a lot of boxes, and they've got to be a property which I look at that I really feel I can add some value to, and make some money out of it that way. I really think in Shepparton, if you're buying an investment property, there's no point buying a well-presented, renovated property and then paying the top price for that. Because once you put the tenant in, odds are the presentation is going to go down. That's unfortunately what is going to happen most of the time, or in many cases when there's a tenant there. And if the presentation goes down, potentially your resale price goes down. So I'd much rather buy a cheaper property and then add some value and try to get some capital growth out of it that way. So I'll continue to invest here, but I will also continue to invest in Melbourne. The good thing about having some properties in both camps is that the properties here get a positive rental yield. Down in Melbourne, they get a negative rental yield. But overall, you can then balance your portfolio. So you can have a mixture of positively and negatively geared properties. And overall, the goal is that you want to have a neutrally geared portfolio. And the reason is that then doesn't impact upon your lifestyle. Okay, so you make a salary, you've got an income, and that income you use, that's your disposable income, and you live off that income. And that pays for your groceries and your holidays and all those sorts of things. If you have a property that's sucking money out of your salary, that's negatively impacting on your lifestyle. And that's costing you. That might cost you a holiday. That might cost you a new car. Might cost you whatever. Okay? But that's having a direct financial impact on your lifestyle. If you can have properties or a portfolio that is neutrally geared, so all the incoming is taking care of all of the outgoing, then that can just look after itself and can be in its own entity, like its own little business, and that's not impacting negatively on your lifestyle. And your lifestyle doesn't change then at all. But you've got an asset base over here that's growing in value, that's creating wealth for you, and one day that's going to be your retirement nest egg.
Mark, you said you negotiate with your banks.
Yep, I negotiate with the banks, yep.
And you mentioned that you borrow 100%.
It's up to the individual purchases. So within our group, okay, so in the latest purchase, which I've done, I mentioned that there's Shepparton investors in there. We've got a builder, we've got policemen, we've got a couple of doctors, we've got a couple of single mums, we've got someone working at a building company. So it's an eclectic group, okay? And it's really up to the individual purchasers how they want to gear it and how much money, if any money, they want to put into it, okay? So obviously how much they're going to borrow. So I go around and then work out how much they do want to borrow. So collectively as a group, what sort of lending are we looking at? And then from there, I then go and have a chat to the banks. So if people want to borrow 100%, that's up to them. If they want to borrow 80%, obviously, and then save on the mortgage insurer, well, then that's up to them. Okay, so, and you can structure it equally any way you like. You can buy the property in a company name, you can buy it in your name, yours and your spouse's name, you can buy it in a superannuation fund. So in the Carnegie one, there was investors there that use their own self-managed superannuation fund. I've never done that, okay, but again, that's up to the individual purchasers. Okay, yes?
What would be the weekly income of those units, roughly?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Okay, so the latest purchase that we've done, I believe that the rental income is going to be $650. Sorry, hang on. Let me start that again. $550 per week. So I've done, for the benefit of the people that are buying in it, I've done a cost analysis. Okay, so we've got our purchase price, which I showed you before. Just let me click backwards a little bit. Okay, so we've got our purchase price here. Okay, and we've got stamp duty, which we have to pay on that property. So I know what our total outlay is. I've assumed that people that are buying in this are borrowing 100%, and their interest is going to be around the $30,000 mark because I've had preliminary chats with mortgage brokers and banks down in Melbourne. Interest rates are still very low, and I know that we can get interest at 4.2%. The rates down in Melbourne are a bit cheaper, as again, compared to Shepparton. The rates down there, I've made an allowance of $1,500. I've factored in insurances, management fees, and those sorts of things. The rental estimate is $550 per week, which I believe is very conservative. I've met with numerous estate agents down there and compared what the rental market is down there. So I think $550 for the size of the townhouse we're buying, I think is very reasonable. So that's a $28,600 income. Okay, the negative cash flow effect, which I predict on this particular development which we're buying, and again, I'm assuming that we're borrowing the full amount, the negative cash flow effect on your pocket is $5,453. That's assuming that you're going to be borrowing the full 100%. But because it's a new property, we do get depreciation. There's a depreciation factor. Okay, and I mentioned depreciation before. It's a legitimate cost which you can then claim. You get it back in your tax return. We've got a quantity surveyor's report. There's $14,000 worth of depreciation which we can claim on those particular townhouses. Okay, so our net effect, our gross effect is that we've got negative cash flow or a negative depreciation of $19,453. Okay. When you claim that in your tax return, if you're in the 34% tax bracket, so if you're a wage earner of $37,000, you're going to get $6,711 back. I don't have a slide of this, sorry. This is just something I brought along, okay, because this is for the people. I brought this in case there was a question. The other people in the group have got this. So if you came into the group, you'd obviously get all of this information. But what it means, if you earn $37,000, you get $6,711 back. If you earn $90,000, you get $7,586 back. It's important to remember that because, remember, our negative cash flow effect, so what it's costing you every year is $5,453. So you've got to physically fund that for 1 year. And then you're going to put in your tax return, okay? And can I assume, let's just assume that you're a $90,000 wage earner for the purposes of this exercise. After tax, you're going to get back $7,586.
Is that
So
on top of what your regular tax return would have been? Is that like...
That is just working on these numbers. So if you've got other things which you're claiming, if you've got travelling expenses, business expenses, if you've got other expenses, I'm talking about this property in isolation, and I'm talking about borrowing 100%. The reason I do these cash flow predictions, everyone's different in our group. As I mentioned, some people will be on different tax brackets, some people will be borrowing more money, some people will be borrowing less money. But I want to work on the worst case scenario so that I can give people an idea of what they can expect as a worst case scenario. And this is the way it's worked for me in the past. And this is one of the reasons I go for new properties. There's a number of reasons I go for new properties, but one of the reasons is this, it's the depreciation schedule. It's cost me $5,453. Okay, that's cost me out of my pocket for the first year. Okay, all right. Then I put in my tax return and I claim my out-of-pocket expenses plus my depreciation. And I put my return in, and then the tax man gives me back $7,586. In this case, if you're a $90,000 wage earner. So next year, I'm out of pocket $5,453. It's paid for. Exactly. That's it. That's my point, Lucas. That's 100% spot on. When I get that refund check, I get $7,586. I personally don't go and blow that at the casino. I put that in the bank account, and then that refund drip feeds my out-of-pocket expenses for the next year. And that goes on year after year after year. And so the impact that property has on me really, and my life and my family, is zero. And that's the way I've built up my portfolios. I mentioned there's a few reasons I go for new properties. The tax depreciation is a really exciting reason and a really great reason to be going for a new property. There used to also be the benefit of stamp duty savings. That changed a couple of years ago. So now we don't get the stamp duty savings if you're an investor and you're buying off the plan. But there used to be benefits for buying off the plan if you're an investor. But the other benefits that you do get is you get a brand new property. And so a brand new property, you would hope that there's not much maintenance that's required on a brand new property. The air conditioners, the heaters, the stoves, the hot water service, everything's new on it. So you really should have, you would hope, for the first 5, 6, 7, 10 years, you would have fairly hassle-free, easy management of that particular property. So it's not one that's going to bleed you from a maintenance point of view. Okay, so that's one benefit. The other thing is that it's a brand new property. So I've found that you tend to find getting tenants quite easy because it's like a brand new car. You know, that brand new home's got that new smell, the carpet's all new, there's no marks on the walls at all. So you tend to find that there's plenty of rental applications, there's plenty of prospective tenants which are lining up wanting to get into that property. Okay? So in my experience, they're a great way to get in because, as I mentioned, they're not bleeding you, you don't have maintenance. Something like a Lifford Street, for instance, which was an established older style home here in Shepparton, well, I've already had to replace the evaporative cooling, which costs $4,000. Eventually there'll be hot waters that need to be replaced and those sorts of things. So that's one of the reasons I look for the new properties.
Insurance and rates?
Yeah, my projection. Yeah, that includes rates, the insurances, and the estate agents' management fees. Thank you very much. No, my pleasure. Thanks for popping along. Yes, so it includes all of my expected outgoing expenses. Yep.
Tax-wise,
Yep.
this thing they're saying about if Labor gets in, there'll be a slight change in this investment property.
Yeah,
You can't. How much effect would that have if they got in? If any?
Look, everyone's got their own opinion, and I really don't think that there's going to be any major wholesale changes to negative gearing and the structure that we've got right now. That's my opinion. They've been talking about removing negative gearing since I was in diapers. I mean, they've been talking about that for a long time, and they haven't done it. And I don't think that they are about to do it. There's a lot of wealth tied up in real estate and in properties, and frankly, they need investors like us buying properties that we then put onto the rental market. And the more rentals that go there, then the more affordable housing and living becomes. So the government doesn't want us to stop investing and buying properties and putting them on the market. Otherwise, they're going to provide public housing, which is really, really expensive. So I don't think that there's going to be any. It's only my opinion. I don't think there's going to be any major wholesale changes, and I think that the status quo will remain pretty much as we see it right now.
Do you ever have any issues with occupancy rates with your investment properties? So people that are missing out because they don't have someone in their property for an extended period or anything like that?
No, look, touch wood. I actually was asked this just the other day. Look, I've been fortunate in that I've never had any long-term rental vacancies. In fact, I've rarely ever had any vacancies at all. When a tenant gives notice, they have to give you at least 30 days notice. And in that time, the property is then put onto the rental market and prospective tenants are shown through, and you can obviously look for new tenants. I've never had an issue getting tenants. In fact, look, I've been really fortunate at McEwen Street. We bought that in 2005. We've still got the same tenants. At Cheltenham, the tenant there's been there for 13 years. We've had really long-term tenants, but I try, and I actually write about it in my second book. I try to be an accommodating landlord. So if the tenant needs anything, if there's repairs that need to be done, don't scrimp, get it done. Okay, keep your tenant happy because that tenant's providing you with money, and you want them to ideally stay in the long term. So I make sure that the repairs are taken care of. If a tenant rolls over from 1 year to the next, I don't increase the rent. I don't. Now, I have been caught out. The tenants at Cheltenham, I hadn't put it up for years and years and years, and I didn't even realise. Just one of those things that they just stayed there and they paid the rent. They've been fantastic tenants. And then I was chatting with the rental manager, and I am miles behind what is market rent for that property. So I've had to put in a series of rent increases now, which we've negotiated over a few years because the tenant wants to stay there, to try to get me somewhere back to par with what market rent is. But my expenses aren't increasing because my borrowings aren't increasing. And I know the way that property is geared, and I know that I know the serviceability, and I know that the tenant pays for all the outgoing costs. And it's actually really easy then just to forget about them, because you know that it's making you an income, you know that it's not costing you anything out of your pocket, and I tend to just let it roll from 1 year to the next. And you do end up having tenants which stay longer because they know that the property's looked after, they know their rent remains the same, and as I really haven't had any problems with long-term vacancies. The other thing is when you're buying newer properties, again, you're attracting a lot of tenants, and make sure the property is looked after. So if a tenant does vacate, then get in there. If there's marks on the wall and if there's things that need to be done, little touch-ups and painting, get it done. It's the ideal time between tenants to go and do those things and make sure your property's being well looked after. And it looks fresh, it smells fresh. Make sure that you're trying to make it as appealing as possible to tenants. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, look,
So
okay.
one last one, what do you
Yep.
mean by they're still available? Like, have
Okay.
you purchased all those?
Okay, so these are done. Okay, so we've actually purchased these, and since then, I've had another investor, again local Shepparton investor. She's also come on, and she's bought a townhouse in this particular development. And I've actually got the contracts. I picked up the contracts from the developers last Friday, and I'm catching up with her tomorrow, and we're signing the contracts. So, in this particular deal, I can still sell some townhouses, and I can still get some investors involved. It's not normally the case. Normally I do like a Carnegie or a Cheltenham or a St Kilda. And what I normally do is I go and I mop up the end. Okay, so with Carnegie, there were 7 apartments left. I went and bought the 7 apartments. The deal was done. There's no more left to sell in that particular development. There was only 26 apartments. Okay, so that's the way I'd normally operate. In this particular case, there's actually still some product there, and there's still some properties, and I can still get some people into this particular development.
Those prices.
There's more
At,
townhouses.
at the moment, Tim, I can get people in at these prices. This is going to sound like a hard sales pitch now, and it's not meant to be a hard sales pitch, but this just happens to be the facts. There's 6 properties left in that particular stage. And then once that stage is sold out, and they're selling 2, usually on a weekend, they've been selling a couple of townhouses, so I'm expecting it to be sold in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Once those 6 remaining townhouses are sold, it then goes to stage 2, the second and final stage, and then there'll be a new release of townhouses and new pricing, and I expect that all the townhouses are going to be dearer.
How many is there totally?
There's about, I think there's about 90, which is a lot. Okay, which is a lot. Normally, it's not the ideal number that I'd look for. As I mentioned before, I try to stay to boutique developments where there's 30 or fewer. And that's very true with apartment buildings. With apartment buildings, I want low rise. I don't want 25-storey buildings. In this particular case, there are more in this development. But I've had to weigh out, that's the only negative with this development, but what outweighs that negative is that with this particular development, there's no common areas and there's no owner's corporation fees as a result, and that's a saving of about $2,500. So every other development I've looked at, has common areas, and there is there will have to be an owner's corporation. And you know, owner's corporations in Melbourne usually start about $2,500. Anywhere from $2,500 to $4,500 is a fairly normal sort of range. So I've got more in this development, but then I've got the saving in the other case. Also, there's variations in plans and facades, and there's enough. I believe that there's enough difference in the development that it's going to be an interesting development, and it won't be plain Jane.
And do those prices include landscaping and all that sort of stuff? So it's
Yeah, they're done.
Yep.
They're done. So it includes. I've negotiated. In addition to that, I've negotiated window furnishings. So all the window furnishings are done. The front, all the landscaping, the fencing, it's all done. So it's walk-in and it's completed. Yep. But that was extra. I mean, I had to negotiate. So in addition, I negotiated the window furnishings on behalf of the group. It was a good negotiation. It was probably one of the was probably one of the pleasing and one of the most satisfying outcomes I've had. It's 6.5%, so it's a big discount. So the investors in the group, remember my commission is 1.65%. So the investors in the group are getting almost a full 5% discount, even above and beyond my fee. So it was a really pleasing outcome, and there's a lot of aspects about this particular deal that was really good. I won't get you bogged down in that now. If you're interested, again, you'll get all the research and all the information about it. And then you can go down and actually visit the site and go through the display and all those sorts of things.
When's that due to be completed?
So that's due to be completed in 2000 and we're in 2019 now, aren't we? So it's going to be, it'll be finished in September 2020. Yeah.
When does the money hand over? What money do you put in?
Well, look, again, Tim, it depends on, I've got investors in the group that have paid. The deposit is equivalent to about 7.5%. I won't go through all the mechanics of it. A typical deposit is equivalent to 10% of the purchase price. In this particular case, we've got a cheaper deposit. It's about 7.5%. Okay, so some people have come up with the 7.5% and paid cash. Others have paid nothing within the group. They simply don't have it. So within the group, again, it's a very eclectic group, and I've got single mums, I've got professional doctors, I've got builders. It's just it's an interesting group, and everyone's got their own personal circumstances. So within the group, I've got people which are extremely asset rich and have got plenty of properties or equity in their own money, equity in their own homes, but they don't have high incomes, not high income earners. I've got others at the other end of the scale that are extremely high income earners, but they don't have any investments and they're jumping in for the first time. So the circumstances, are tailored for each individual person. But I've got people that have paid zero deposit, and I've got others which have paid the full 7.5% deposit.
So what sort of homework should we be doing with our own finances to get in a position where we find out what we think we can?
I just recommend that you start with your own personal banker. So you've got.
Find out how much equity you've got in your own home, and then how much of that you can use to get into something.
Yeah, look, the first spot to start, when I started, when I wanted to get into property investing, and again, I write about it in my first book. I'd only just bought the home. I think I bought the home, it was an apartment in Melbourne, and I bought the property, it was only 6 or 8 months prior to getting it valued. And I really needed a high valuation because I needed to show I had equity in that property, and I was going to use that equity to launch me into buying investment properties. So I went through the process and the exercise of talking to valuers and getting them into my apartment and getting it valued. And again, I wanted to talk that up as high as I possibly could. So it was an interesting exercise that I went through. I wanted to get that as high as I could because that was obviously then equity I had in the property, and that was going to create my wealth and launch me into property investing. So it's a good spot to start with your own home and get some valuations. You can talk to local estate agents here. God knows there's plenty of them. There's 14 or 15 local estate agencies. Have a chat to them and get an idea off them what you think your home's worth, and work that as high as you can, obviously. And then have a chat to your bank. Now the bank won't refinance or rely on the estate agent's valuation solely, because they're not a sworn independent valuer. Okay, it's only a person's opinion, but it still carries some weight because they're going to give that opinion to the sworn valuer, and they're going to use that to guide them when they're doing their valuation. And particularly if you're just refinancing because you want to build wealth and buy more properties, the bank will help you. The bank's actually on your side. Okay, so but that's a really good spot to start, and I'd suggest you start with your own bank manager. One of the things with this particular deal, and I'm not going to look again, I won't go into all of the mechanics because we're going to be here for the rest of the night. With this particular deal, and only with this deal, I was able to also negotiate subject to bank finance. Now generally I can't do the subject to bank finance, and the reason is, so to go back and give you an example with Carnegie. Carnegie, we bought the property, we bought it off the plan. Remember I mentioned the homes hadn't even been demolished. So the old weatherboard homes were still there, and they needed to be demolished, removed, and they needed to start doing the works. And they were a couple of years from having a finished product. So if you're buying a property off the plan and it's 2 years away from completion, you can't then go to the bank and say, I want formal bank finance approval now, but the property's going to settle in 2 years' time. Because in 2 years' time, they don't know what the interest rates are going to be. They don't even know if you're still going to be employed. I mean, lots of things can happen in a 2-year period, okay? So you need to go and get your finance sorted out just prior to settlement, leading up to settlement. So there's no point with those particular deals of negotiating a subject to finance clause, because the subject to finance clause, if it's a 2-year settlement, your subject to finance clause would actually need to go for 21 months of the 24-month period, and no one is going to let you have a 21-month subject to finance clause on a property which you're buying. Okay, so they were bought unconditionally. In this particular case, because of the way I was able to negotiate it and structure the contracts, this particular deal I was able to do a subject to finance on, but it's the one and only one I've ever been able to do a subject to finance on of this nature. Okay.
Interesting.
Hopefully there's a bit to think about. Okay. So as I mentioned, you can go at it yourself, or you've got my card and my contact details there. Anyone is welcome to contact me anytime, whether it's about Melbourne, whether it's about Shepparton, whether it's just a general chit chat and a general question. I'm always happy to hear from people and happy to help. And that was the whole idea of the books and getting the books out there so that people could jump in and do it themselves. It's only because I decided that I wanted to get back into buying a few more properties in Melbourne, and I made that decision last year, that I then started up the company which I've now got, Pillar Real Estate Advocacy Service, and I'm jumping in and now doing these seminars again. But the whole idea with the books was that people can hopefully go in and do it themselves. Okay, all right. Thank you again for coming. Okay, cheers.
I found this seminar really, it was great. Actually, there was a lot of value. There's a lot of things I didn't know. I recommend it to anyone. Most important thing I took out of tonight was obviously the differences between investing in rural areas versus Melbourne city areas. So I learned a lot about that tonight, and
I found the seminar tonight to be really helpful. I haven't had a lot of experience in looking at investment properties, and Mark was really clear and understood everything he was talking about. It was really good, really recommend it. Yeah. The number one thing that I took out of tonight when Mark was talking was just the amount of effort and experience that you need to be able to make the right decisions when you're purchasing an investment property. So Mark's knowledge and what he's been doing for such a long time puts a lot of faith into me and what he's doing. I would recommend coming to a seminar like this to anyone. It's not much time out of your day, and I found it really informative, and I got a lot of information out of it.